there was this perception that this guy's milking the system and like making tons of money and like charging way more than whatever, what other events are charging. And in fact, I was losing so much money. The first year I was, literally, I lost more money than our total revenue. It was like more than 100% loss. And, I needed to employ people. I needed to have full-time staff to actually run this business. And I said it was lonely because I couldn't actually tell anyone. I couldn't actually tell anyone how bad it was.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. The Cape Epic is widely regarded as the crown jewel in mountain bike stage racing. Many notable legends of the sport have called it the Tour de France of mountain biking. The biggest names are competing, the depth of competition is unparalleled, the professionalism of how it's organized is flawless, and the difficulty is something that makes it proud of just finishing. As any South African mountain biker will tell you, it's described as a rite of passage. Personally, I've competed in the Cape Epic twice, not including showing up in 2020 when it was canceled due to COVID. I've seen and experienced all of the things I just mentioned firsthand and count myself incredibly fortunate to have done so. So how on earth did a young 30-year-old man who was new to mountain biking, never mind no event organizing experience, create a cultural phenomenon in the mountain bike world in this faraway land, making a bucket list for every single cross-country rider in the world? Kevin Vermaak is the founder of this spectacular event. He grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, studied and worked as an electronic engineer, and as many South Africans do, he had a thirst for adventure, extreme activities, and entrepreneurship. As I said, he wasn't a born and bred cyclist. He was working in London in the IT industry when he bought his first bike in the mid-90s. At first, it was just commuting because he preferred that over public transport. And then, as often is the case, it progressed from there. Fairly ill-prepared, in 2002, he went on a mountain bike stage race in Costa Rica known as La Ruta with a few friends as he was turning 30 years old. This is where the Cape Epic story begins.
Called La Ruta de los Conquistadores. It's the route of the Spanish conquistadors. Goes from the Atlantic Ocean across Costa Rica to the Pacific. And I think it was probably the original mountain bike stage race because we did it in 2002, and that was the 10th anniversary. And certainly I didn't know of any other stage races that were started at that time. And yeah, it was actually my first mountain bike race I ever entered because whilst I did have a mountain bike, but it was for fun. We used to go and just ride for getting fit or go and do adventures around the world. So literally it was the first mountain bike race I entered, and that was in November 2002. And yeah, myself and some friends went across from London and did La Ruta. And it was a time that coincided with a phase in my life. I just turned 30. I'd finished a huge project at work, and I'd hit a degree of financial independence where I thought, what am I going to do now? Do I leave, go and live somewhere else? Do I start a business? So it was like I had a very fertile mind for doing something completely new. And we headed off to Costa Rica and did this race at the time of our lives. And it was a fabulous ride. But the logistics around it made it so difficult. I remember finishing, having to hang around, no access to tools or mechanics. And, your bike is like destroyed from 7 hours of riding in the mud. Then take a bus for 2 hours back to the central San Jose, sitting in traffic. And then in my hotel room, fixing my bike, and then 5 the next morning, like taking another 2-hour bus trip back to the start. And so the logistics around it just made it, it was actually, the riding was awesome, but the logistics around it made it difficult to enjoy the full 24-hour experience. So, literally, I remember sitting on that bus, chatting to my mates, thinking, wow, there's an opportunity here because the race was sold out. It wasn't cheap by any means. And I mean, you know, queues of North Americans that were, lining up to do this race. And I thought, well, I thought I could organize a better package where, the riding um, could be amazing. And it wasn't like I was locked into doing it in South Africa. I mean, I was sitting in London thinking, where's the best place to do a mountain bike stage race? Turns out I think it was South Africa, and for a host of reasons. But I felt confident that I could organize let's say the package, the whole package, such that we would put on a true premium experience. And I distinctly remember sitting on the bus chatting to folks and saying, like, do you think this is an idea? Is this worth doing? And turned out it was.
Was it a two-person race format?
No, that was a solo race. But I mean, it's an interesting insight to how people want to do these races, because I don't think I would ever have traveled from London or gone through the training in order to do the race if I'd done it on my own. So whilst I was riding the race, at the start line on my own, I was standing next to my mates with whom I'd spent 6 months training. It was for all of us. It was like our first stage race, and this first time we traveled, across the planet basically to do a bike race. So it was a phenomenal experience, preparing and doing the research and finding out what Costa Rica was like. And it's actually an important insight, I think, in terms of how you build an experience around a bike stage race for amateurs.
So you started thinking like there's an opportunity here to do something better and um what was the next step like after you finished that race? When did you start actually planning and saying I'm going to do something here?
From the day I finished university, I mean, I knew I'd always start my own business at some point. I think that's the South African mindset as well. It's like I was always going to be working for myself, and I was just treading water and saving cash in my 20s whilst working in London to get to the point where you can start your own business. And I had a lot of ideas in London, but none of them were big enough for me to actually resign from my current job and double down and embrace the new idea. I came back to London, started doing the research, and just got so excited about finally having an idea which I thought was big enough to resign for and get started on it. I'd mentioned that I'd finished a big project which had taken a lot out of me in that year leading up to the Ruta. So I was kind of like, my mind was, I was looking for something else, and so I sent off a rough business plan to the two agencies that were involved in the Transalp, which at the time which I didn't know when I entered the Ruta, but I found out it was definitely the biggest mountain bike stage race then. And that was 8 days, teams of 2 over the Alps, starting in Bavaria, going over the German and Tyrol Alps into the Lake District of Italy. And I approached the two agencies that were behind that and headed off to meet them early January, and met them both. And they both had different proposals how they could work together. And I chose one of them, and agreed to work together. Came back to London, resigned on the Monday morning, and literally within just over a month, I'd packed up 8 years of living in London and headed off back to Cape Town. And so I started the race in London, but moved back to Cape Town quickly.
Why did you eventually decide on Cape Town if kind of the world was the consideration?
Well, it's obviously an area that I do know, even if I'd never worked in South Africa. I didn't have, like, let's say, a professional network in South Africa. But it was the one area I could look on a map and just go, okay, this could work. Whereas I probably couldn't do that. Well, I knew the UK wasn't the location, and that was obviously where I'd been living for the last 8 years. And I'll mention a couple of reasons why I think that South Africa, March, Southern Hemisphere was particularly good for a mountain bike stage race. South Africa ticked those boxes.
So you pack up, you move back to Cape Town. What does day one look like of organizing what, what's going to be one of the biggest mountain bike races in the world later. What did that look like at the very start? Like this was what, 2003?
2003. Yeah. So we rode the race in mid-November 2002. 7th of Jan 2003, I was in Munich meeting the German agencies. Resigned on Monday the 9th, 14th of February. I was in Cape Town. And funny, the image that sticks with me was, I'd only come back to South Africa twice in the 8 years that I'd lived in London. And I remember getting off the plane, looking back, taking a photograph of the plane, thinking, wow, it's like a new life starting for me here. And it was bright and sunny and blue skies. And I mean, needless to say, the weather was quite different when I left London on the 14th of February. And so just incredibly excited to be starting in, 30 years old, starting a new business and just feeling very, very bullish about your ideas. And also very naive as well, because you can't imagine what could possibly go wrong. You just think everything's going to work perfectly. And yeah, I mean, so straight away I went about marketing the race. I had a rough idea of how we were going to do it, but I didn't bother trying to organize it because I just knew that I needed people to know and enter the race before. Yeah, I need guys to actually ride the race before we could, go crazy and actually organize it. So I didn't bother about working out, what it's going to cost or anything. In fact, I looked at what people were paying to do the Transalp, and I looked at the exchange rate between the euro and the rand. I thought, heck, we've got to be able to do this for a lot less than what they charge for the Transalp. So that's how I set the price. And little did I know that our model was going to be very different, and it's going to cost way more than what it costs to deliver the Transalp. So I didn't come up with a price based on costs, which I guess would be if you took a MBA approach to building a business plan and setting a price, you'd know what it's going to cost first. Well, I didn't. I just thought this is what people are willing to pay, and let's get them to come to South Africa into the race. And once we sold out, I said, okay, great. Now I'm going to start organizing it, and now I'm going to work out exactly how we're going to deliver what I've sold.
Really? You must have had a route to show people, because like from the versions I've done, it's all private land and stuff. You would have had to have, individual deals and stuff. That's something you worried about later?
Yeah. So, I mean, for sure we had an idea. I mean, we said we are going to start in Knysna, finish in Cape Town. And I mean, the original idea was to finish at the waterfront in Cape Town, which is now it's the most visited tourist attraction on the African continent, in front of the pyramids, in fact. And I just thought, beautiful tourist town, 8 days, I think 700 kilometers away. Right, start there. It's kind of like a trans South Africa almost. And in those days, all mountain bike races were being called trans this and trans that. So the working title was a Trans South Africa for our race. And yeah, so we had a start location, finish location, and we figured 8 days made sense, and we figured, you should be able to get a route that would go from Knysna to Cape Town in 8 days. And that was it. I mean, that's what we basically marketed. We said we're going to stay in race villages and stay in tents. I mean, I said people are going to stay in tents. I didn't even know if 500 tents existed in South Africa, like those small 2-man tents that people slept in the early days of the Epic. And it turns out that they didn't exist. We had to order them in. After I'd sold the entries, I realized there's no one that actually owns. I can't rent 500 tents. So I had a rough idea for the route, and obviously I'd engage with guys to be designing the route. And funny, that's another misconception I had, because when I was packing my bags in London, I thought, great, I'm gonna buy a KTM. I'm gonna spend like months cruising up and down Western Cape, finding routes. And as it turned out, within a month, I had employed a guy to actually be the route designer. And I basically buried myself in my desk and spent, 16-hour days on a computer. It was not at all what I expected, but turned out that's what you needed. I mean, I needed to be in an office, burning the midnight oil and employing guys to be out there designing the routes and planning the logistics.
Did you think, 8 days or 800 kilometers or whatever it was, point to point, was that something that you said, like, this has got to be really hard, but not too hard. But or what was the sort of a calculation you were doing around that, or was it just basically from here to here and as simple as that? What were you trying to make out of it?
I think we need to transport ourselves back to what mountain biking was, and certainly in South Africa, what it was in 2003 when we launched the event. And whilst my goal was always to be the world's foremost mountain bike stage race, um, at the time, what is much more communicable or much more palatable to a guy that's going to get in a plane and fly around the world to ride his mountain bike was that they're coming on a tour, let's say a fast tour. It had to be from, it had to be from A to B to C to D and to move every day like a traditional stage race. They needed to be seeing the country. They needed to be, um, yeah, yeah. It was more of this, let's say, tour, see the country. Okay. But in my mind, I knew I wanted to evolve it into a competitive race. And in the beginning, that traveling aspect was crucial. But over time, we evolved it into this sporting spectacle where it was the world's best riders racing full gas every day for 8 days. And it became less important that you were moving every day and seeing different, areas of the country. It became flat out racing. And that's actually what I wanted to create. In South Africa, mountain biking was a very far distant second cousin to road cycling. Mountain biking was, absolutely. I mean, I think at the time it was probably 25 road bikes sold for every mountain bike. You had massive mass participation road races. The famous one is obviously the Cape Town Cycle Tour. I think they were selling out instantaneously with a lot troop of 35,000 riders. I don't know if it still has a record, but it was the largest individually timed cycle event in the world. And they happened in all the major cities. I mean, Joburg, Pretoria, Durban, Bloemfontein, Cape Town. They all had these mass participation road races with 20,000 riders or more. And mountain biking was kind of like hippie sport. I mean, it was baggies, unshaven, like long hair, campfires, camping, dirt festivals. And I wanted to make mountain biking sexy. I mean, I wanted to make mountain biking as like a high performance sport. Basically make it more professional and appeal to a slightly different audience that was currently mountain biking in South Africa. And we managed to do it.
What was the market you were targeting in the very first one? Was it Europeans?
Absolutely. In terms of, you can say the markets we targeted, it was obviously easiest to go to, Germany and Switzerland and the German speaking countries in Europe because I did have agents that had marketing partners based in Germany. And also, I don't want to underplay the importance that they had at the early days of the Epic because sure, they brought in Adidas. I mean, we had Adidas International as a sponsor, and it's quite a big deal. I mean, like the head of global sports marketing for outdoor had never even been to South Africa, and we managed to get him to sponsor this new bike race that only had a PowerPoint presentation. So we did various things. We sponsored a Black South African team to go across and be the first Black Africans to ride the Transalp, which at the time was sponsored by Adidas as well. And we did, arrange for a European mountain bike team to come and do a photo shoot and a launch in South Africa. Coincided with actually the launch of the Cape Epic 10 months before the first race. We did quite a bit of marketing in Germany, but also, I'd been living in the UK for 8 years, so I had a network of like adventure-oriented friends. And the first guys to sign up were my best mates that had, traveled to Costa Rica with me. And so I think in that first year we had 21 countries and 25% international riders. And then the South Africans, interestingly, we weren't necessarily targeting mountain bikers because in those days, a mountain bike racer, a marathon in South Africa was 50 kilometers long. 50 kilometers, maybe 1,000 meters of climbing. They paid 80 Rand, which is 80 South African Rand, which at the time was probably $6 or so to enter. So that's the type of that was a mountain biker, and we had far bigger um, events in South Africa in other sports that was getting the A-type driven athlete training for 6 months, taking on a big challenge, trying to, competing, trying to beat his mate that had entered the race with him. And that was more in running, in canoeing, and in road cycling. So actually we were tapping outside the sport of mountain biking. And every year we would ask, did you buy a new mountain bike in the 12 months before the Cape Epic? And I think it peaked one year at 70%. And generally, the early riders of the Epic had never they'd barely done a mountain bike race, let alone a mountain bike stage race before they entered the Cape Epic.
Oh, geez. So how did it go? How did the first one go in the end? What was it like looking back?
Oh, it was very special, I must say. So for me, I can't tell you that. I mean, I've never worked so hard in my life. I mean, I did like 3 years of work, I'd say, in the 12 months leading up to the race. And I had, one or two full-time employees, loads of contractors. And, we had 550 riders. I had, a crew of, it was like 250 people working at the first race. It's a ratio of 1 to 2 is quite high. And we took, a lot of things. You can do a lot of things in spreadsheets. You can time how long it takes one guy to pitch a tent and take a tent down. And you can work out how many tents you can fit into a super link and what size mattresses you need in order for 550 of them to fit into one super link track. You can do all of that in a spreadsheet, but you can only really test it at showtime. And so, there was days of no sleep thinking, is this going to work? And turned out, it worked. It was amazing to see actually. There's like an army of people moving, 500-600, tents, if you include the crew. Actually, no, it was more with all the crew tents as well. Moving every day, the riders would leave and pick up the tents, the guys would rush, put them up the next day. And we didn't really get it right first year that, all the tents were there waiting for the riders. But, generally the riders enjoyed it. The next race, the first race sold out in 3 days. The second race sold out in 5 hours. And then the third race, we introduced the lottery already.
Wow. So you were happy with the first one and how it went, and it was a success by all measures. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the fact that most folk went home and enjoyed it such that they told their friends. And yeah, like I said, we opened the entries for the second race 3 months after the first race, and it sold out in 5 hours. And since then, generally, they had various methods to sell entries. But I always say that, it's a success if people go home and tell their mates that, this is the best thing they've done on a mountain bike in years, and they enter the next year's race. And we managed to get that sort of feedback every year for decades.
One of the things about events, I found out the hard way because I've run some events before, is that typically you get like a surge at the beginning and then a lot of people who wait to the last minute to sign up. But Cape Epic really isn't an event you can wait to the last minute. Was that part of the plan and how you were able to front load those, that entry revenue to be able to fund the rest of it? Or did it kind of just luck out and be that? Or did you employ strategies to make sure that it did sell out very, very quickly early on?
Having a race that sells out is incredibly powerful. Okay. Once again, go back to 2004. There were 4 other mountain bike stage races in the world. There was a Transalp, which is like let's say the leader. They were the first to have the 2-person team race concept, the 8 days, riding over the Alps. They would also be setting out as well. And then there was the Crocodile Trophy in Australia. There was La Ruta in Costa Rica, and there was the Trans Rockies, which was organized by the same agency that organized the Trans Alps. They were, the Transalp, basically you slept in parking garages, or, you brought your own mobile home, but it wasn't really a race that is set up. And I think a lot of the others that I mentioned, Costa Rica, you stay in hotels in San Jose 2 hours away from the finish line. And, the others, you took your own tent or you had to pitch it yourself. And so our format was completely different. Okay. And, to arrive and have five, six, 700. I mean, it was over 1,000 tents all pitched neatly in rows with like marquees, 100-meter long marquees where you had, dinner for over 1,000 people, dinner, breakfast. Um, and, this big traveling circus was quite let's say, a ballsy pitch, to go to not only the riders that entered it, but like the suppliers. And I'll never forget, like I teed up a safety official and, a couple other, like the critical services from medical to marshals on the route, etc. I remember having their first meeting, and the one guy like just said in passing, "Oh, wow, it's not, I'm not sure if this is actually going to happen." And then I realized you're already sold out, Um, then you kind of like, okay, this is the real deal. It is happening. It's serious. Same thing if you go to a sponsor, and it's not a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, not the first year it was obviously, but once you sold the entries, and at that time it was way more than any other bike race in terms of entry fee revenue. Everyone just took you seriously, and a lot of people, certainly the folk that looked at our business performance in the first 5-6 years, where I mean, literally we racked up operating losses for 5 years. So one might say that you're basically charging too little. For sure, we were charging too little, but we converted that demand into attracting sponsors. And so there's a trade-off. Do you risk not selling out instantly and take greater entry fee revenue, and maybe we erred on the former? But the reality was that it was very powerful to go to sponsors and to whatever stakeholder we need to speak to and say this race is instantly sold out. Or as soon as we had the lottery in the third year, I mean, it was like 4 or 5 times oversubscribed.
At the time, those first 5 events you said that were running at a loss, was that a stressful time for you? And how to continue funding it at all? Or were you always confident in cash flow and sponsors was able to top it up and so forth? Or how did you manage that?
Without a doubt, the most stressful and lonely period of my life, because if the community is used to paying, like I said, I mean, it's 80 Rand. So that the exchange rate at that time was probably like, I don't know, $5-6. And suddenly, I mean, our first race, I think we charged 7,600 Rand. So $600-700. It was more than the Transalp, more than the Rita. And, but I mean, heck, we were 8 days. And certainly in South Africa, where these events are typically organized at that time by charities and voluntary organizations that are raising money for charity, it was like, wow, this guy's coming in to commercialize our sport. And like, there was a lot of backlash. And, there was this perception, and we increased the price every year. I mean, it was sold out and we were making a loss. So obviously you increase the price, but not as radically as we did after 5 years. But, there was this perception that this guy's milking the system and like making tons of money and like charging way more than whatever, what other events are charging. And in fact, I was losing so much money. I mean, the first year I was, literally, I lost more money than our total revenue. I mean, it was like more than 100% loss. And, I needed to employ people. I mean, I needed to have full-time staff to actually run this business. And I said it was lonely because I couldn't actually tell anyone. I couldn't actually tell anyone how bad it was. And I was 100% shareholder. So, I mean, I know that after the second event already, and we racked up, 2 years of heavy losses, no one knew except me, because and there were a couple of creditors that I'd negotiated extended credit lines. But, so I couldn't, I was employing staff that were giving up other jobs to come and join me. And I couldn't tell them how bad it was because they wouldn't have worked for me. And certainly riders, if riders knew that the money they were paying to enter a race in 9 months' time was actually being used to cover all the losses from the previous race, probably wouldn't have parted with their cash and go to a business that was technically insolvent, and the race is only 9 months' time. So I just absolutely had to keep that so secret. And it was so lonely because the perception in the market was, wow, this great race is doing so well. It's so expensive. And this guy must be absolutely, cleaning it. And I was the complete opposite. So that was very lonely. And then to answer your question, how we did it, I had like 3 phases of financing it. I mean, the first one was you spend all your own savings. and you sign all the securities that you sign all the sureties that it can give you the credit you need for the first race. And then I call the next round creative financing, because if I could extend the credit line for just 3 months after for the suppliers that did, let's say it was the second race and this really kicked in. I knew, the second race sold out immediately. So I knew that I could deliver a good enough race in the second year that I'd sell out the third race. So I just had to, get a 3-month credit line with suppliers, and I'd get the entry fee for the third race, and I could pay off, my debts for the second race. So I did that creative financing. I did that for about 3 years or so. And then the third phase was when that had run out. It wasn't working anymore. And I actually got the South African Industrial Development Corporation. It's basically a development bank that funds startups, etc. in South Africa. And I got them to provide bridging finance, and that was great because I kept that open for like 5 years, where just literally from the like a month before the race, where all the big payments that we made until entry fees opened, and we got majority of the entry fee for next year. And they came on board after the third event, and that actually coincided with getting ABSA on board as a sponsor. And a lot of people think, oh wow, when ABSA came on board, would have solved all the problems. But the reality was that it actually put us in the big league, because at the time ABSA was an ABSA for the international listeners, and ABSA at the time was a preeminent bank in Africa. It was owned by Barclays. It was basically Barclays' representation in South Africa, in the African continent, and they were the title sponsor of the Springboks, probably our most valuable sporting property in South Africa. They were the title sponsor of Bafana, which is our national soccer team. And bear in mind that the Football World Cup was taking place in South Africa a few years later. So all the corporate money was in football. They were also the title sponsor of the main football league in South Africa, and the title sponsor of the main rugby league. So it's like all the biggest sponsored properties in the country was sponsored by ABSA. Now they're suddenly sponsoring this mountain bike race upstart. And actually it just, it launched us into this uber professional sponsorship environment. I mean, suddenly we were dealing with the same agency that was dealing with the FIFA World Cup and, the Springboks and the Bafana national team, and we had to deliver. And so actually our first year of having ABSA as a sponsor was probably our worst year financially, because of all the things we had to put in place to deliver to a mainstream sponsor that is definitely not used to sponsoring mountain bike races. And at the time, it was inconceivable that a preeminent bank would actually sponsor mountain biking in this country. In fact, globally, I mean, still today, there aren't many, let's say, banks. I mean, I can think of a handful of banks that are sponsoring sport cycling and in mountain biking. I can think of one or two.
How did it come about that you were able to get the connection to ABSA and bring them on board?
Yeah, a funny story actually. So after 2006, I had a team looking at the Ridge inbox, and you had riders sending emails, and I don't know, every now and again I'd like peruse to just see what people are asking, and and I came in one year between Christmas and New Year, and I thought, let me just go look and see what riders are saying. I mean, this is like pre-social media, right? So this is where riders say what they think. And I got an email from a rider that his signature was, executive assistant to the CEO at ABSA. This is my chance. And I was, I'd been like, I'd been, walking the streets before that. I'd gone to, we had four main retail banks in South Africa. I'd seen the other three already, and without luck. I mean, like I said, everyone was focused on football and golf at that time. And anyway, he got me meeting with, this group sponsorship manager, and it was out of strategy. And luckily he liked it. And it was a small sponsorship from one of the corporate business banking division in ABSA. And over time, I built the relationship, and now it's obviously within their group strategy, and it's actually the biggest sponsorship within Absa. It's the longest running sports sponsorship in South Africa at the moment of a single property. It's been going on for that's 20-year sponsorship, really.
You mentioned something earlier that I certainly have felt through, my journey, and it's not something a lot of people have mentioned, but just the loneliness of, not having anyone to share this with, the problems, the solutions, the good times, the bad times. It's kind of all on you. And um, how did you deal with that? Did you have any mentors that you were working with at the time, or anyone to share this load with and help guide you?
Okay, so I had some awesome staff, which, at some point they did realize the situation, and I shared it with them. And so we took it on together, whilst still the financial risk was all carried by myself. In fact, Absa connected me with a mentor because Absa was also aware of the fact that, it wasn't working financially. And they connected me with a mentor. And so they're a really good partner in that respect, and that they weren't only a sponsor, but they actually were a business partner, like a good investment bank should be. And it's connected me with a mentor. And in hindsight, it was pretty simple, but it was just, double. I mean, we had tried some other events because at the time we thought one route to profitability was to get better yield out of our annual costs. And we did one or two other races. And but in the end, the advice was just, cancel all the other events, double down on the Cape Epic, and just charge more. And so we literally increased entry fee by 50% overnight. Same thing, huge backlash, sold out in seconds. In fact, that year we introduced that was the first year we opened the entries literally the day after the race finished. So, you finished on Sunday, Monday, midday, or Monday at 2:00. We opened the entries for the following year's race. We did early bird entries, bam, sold out at 50% increase. And whilst we didn't get rid of our, accumulated losses within the next 12 months, but I knew that, okay, now we're safe, because with that price increase on the entry fees, and that demand, I knew that we'd be fine. Within 3 years, we'd, get rid of our losses.
What were your constraints with growing, like maybe double the entries? And was it a consideration of like, no, we actually have to make it sell out and keep it at that sort of like that razor's edge of selling out and being wide open? Or what was that calculation like?
I mean, if the demand was such that we could have done 4 or 5 times the number of riders in the race, the limiting factor was not necessarily the demand. I mean, for sure, we always wanted to have demand, like, and a waiting list. And I'll tell you a little about how one can get a lot of intelligence, and you can really fine tune like some of the subtleties in the race by having a waiting list and a lottery. But I mean, for us, it was more the limiting factor was like the quality of the experience and the service. Like, I mean, for us, like the athlete experience, the rider experience was like number one. And so when we were moving every single day, so like the first 5 years of the race, we had 8 stages and eight different finishes, and we moved every day to a new town, moving west from Naza to Cape Town or to Stellenbosch. And so that is quite a logistical challenge. And so the numbers were more limited to how we could provide an awesome service. And then more recently, the limit is actually around just the trails. I mean, we've got like serious single track. It's just single track from start to finish now. And riders are way faster than they used to be in the early years, but it does still mean that if you've got the winner start, or the top riders leaving at 7 a.m., generally the guys coming last take double the time. So if you do a 5-hour stage for the winner, a 10-hour stage is, they're starting, they've got to start 2 hours behind because you don't want to have congestion. Puts them in, it's almost dark when they're getting in. So that's actually the limiting factor now in terms of the total number of riders in the field. But earlier it was actually around the logistics, but you to move the traveling circus every day for 8 days, it was limiting. And I mean, the numbers, we had 550 in the first year, then we went up to 850, then we went up to 1,050, and then we got to 1,200, and then it was that we found was a sweet spot, and we stuck at 1,200 for a long time. It was only when like very late on, in fact, almost, I'd say since my departure, where the financials are being ratcheted up and the entry fee now is a lot. And obviously that influences the financials. So now I'd say the number is like being maxed in terms of getting the financial return, but still delivering the experience.
Yeah. Was making it a two-person race something that came from, partnering with the Transalps and so forth, or was there another reason behind that? You didn't have to do that. What was the reasoning behind that?
So just to be clear, we never partnered with the Transalp. So it turns out there were two agencies involved, and the one agency actually had a fallout with the Transalp. And so we worked with this alternate agency that had been involved in the early days. Yeah, exactly. And they'd been involved in the early days of the Transalp. So they knew it well, and so the two-person team concept, sure, I knew that it worked well at the Transalp, but because we were targeting pros as well, okay, and when I say pros, I mean, for sure there were big marathon names in the Transalp and other mountain bike stage races, but I wanted to get like the Olympic champions and the World Cup winners and the World Cup circuit to come and ride. I mean, those are clearly the biggest names in mountain biking. And they don't do other stage races. They weren't doing any stage races in those days. And they also all ride on their own, as a single rider. So we had huge pushback. I was trying to create this pro-am race, and the pros, the World Cup pros, no way, they ride on their own. And all of them, I mean, if they weren't successful in their first race, which is rarely the case, they pushed back because they felt I could have won this race if I wasn't riding with a weaker partner, and my factory team doesn't have another rider that's good enough to ride with me over 8 days. So why can't I just ride on my own? So we had huge pushback. But at that point, I realized that this is actually the secret sauce. Okay, if you do this right, this two-person team concept is magic. And part of the magic, in addition to this two-person team format, is that you're actually doing the exact same experience as the pros. So the amateur, which obviously is like driving the economics of the event. It's amazing for them to be doing exactly the same as the pros. It needed to be the same, like the pros, two-person, as well as the amateurs. And take the amateur, I mean, they're embarking on a big challenge. A lot of them might never have been to South Africa before. They might never have done, 800 k's on a mountain bike before. So they sign up with a mate, and then they go through this whole journey of preparing for the race. And in Europe, in Northern Hemisphere, you've got to train through winter. It's a challenge. But to do that with a mate is awesome. And then to travel and come to the event and cross the finish line with a mate is just super special. And generally you find people, end up best friends for life. Or obviously it could be a divorce, but in most cases, it's like a best friend for life. Yeah. And then for the pros, it was totally, different, and we had to really push back on it. But all of them, once they found a partner that they could gel with, and then they subsequently won the race, they did well, they achieved their goals, it was exhilarating. They loved it. And in fact, all the guys that pushed back, from Nino Schurter to Christoph Sauser, they all now embrace the two-person race, but for the Cape Epic. I mean, I'm not saying every race, but for the Cape Epic. And for sure, it creates a lot of drama. Everyone has a good day, everyone has a bad day, and you fight through with your partner, and then there's always huge technicals at the Epic just because of the terrain. And to face those technicals with a team of two, you could say that the downside is that your partner has a technical, you could have carried on, but it's quite a short-sighted view because you could have a technical tomorrow. So to solve it and to have someone there that can help you with the technical issues as well, and it for sure creates great TV drama, which we've had guys riding like the last 5Ks on rims because the tires are blown out, and partners pulling, carrying them on the bike, two guys riding on one bike. And I mean, these are pros, but this is how they finish the stage, and it makes for a great story.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover. and that we should exist to serve you, rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. How did you get the Big Fish pros to come to create the spectacle and the media attention and that? Who were the first sort of two big that you went after and they actually got?
So the first race, I was lucky. Manny Haymans at the time was a Namibian Olympian that was doing very well on the European marathon circuit. I mean, he had a nickname, Mr. African, and he would win a lot of certainly the German marathon events. And I teed him up. He was actually an Adidas athlete as well. So I teed him up. And then he asked Carl Platt, who was the German marathon champion at the time, and numerous Transalp winner, to come out and do the race. And they won the first race. And one of the things that we just hadn't got our heads around that first year was prize money. Like, what is the guy going to win? Right. And I'll never forget the night before, literally on the night before the final day, I'm sitting down and saying, "Well, so what are we going to give these guys?" It sounds crazy. I mean, today you'd never do it, but it's just, I mean, we had so many things that we were, so many balls in the air. And in the end, we got some Adidas sunglasses, and Carl Platt was sponsored by, obviously, a competing brand. He couldn't even wear the sunglasses that he got. And so to get him back the next year was like, yeah, he loved the experience. And, but to get him back, it was like, you had to convince him, okay, cool, we're going to make all these changes, and okay, cool, he came. And then he brought a Rocky Mountain team, and not, it wasn't a team that was cobbled together at the last minute. And, but in general, the pros, I mean, for me, it is always about getting the World Cup circuit. Okay. And it's still today. If you take the top 10 on the UCI cross-country rankings, or the top 10 in the World Cup rankings, they don't do any mountain bike stage race, except if they do one, it's the Cape Epic. I said I'd come back to some of the magic ingredients about the Cape Epic, why it worked in South Africa at the time of the year. And this is important, but they don't do any other race. Okay. And so I knew that I needed to get these guys, like the Olympic champions, to come and do the race. I would spend months, literally months in Europe, going from World Cup to World Cup. So yeah, we managed to convince them. I never forget, in 2007 was our first race where we had, we got our date right and got a few other things right. And we had it was like 7 of the top 10 UCI ranked riders, basically the World Cup circuit. I'll never forget Ralph Knapp, who was the reigning marathon world champion at that point. He said, like, hey, this is basically a World Cup every day for 8 days, because he was racing against all these World Cup competitors in South Africa. And for a lot of them, it was like the first trip to South Africa. There were quite a few, particularly Swiss mountain bikers, that were coming to South Africa to train. I mean, I remember meeting Nino Schurter at 19 years, Florian Fergel, the junior champion there. I convinced them to stay a bit longer, or to come back to South Africa to do the Epic.
When did the female pros start sort of getting the desire to come over and do it, or did that take a lot of convincing as well?
So Gunmi Sudal said to me, in the year that you make the women's prize money equal to the men's, I'll be there. Okay. And I don't know, 2011, I think it was, she came out and rode, and yeah, we had equal prize money. In 2008, that was the last year that we did the point to point, the 8 days moving every day from Nasne to Cape Town. And that came about because, same thing, Tom Ritchie was riding with Thomas Frischknecht, and it was Tom Ritchie's first time to South Africa, and he's, Frischknecht had convinced him to come and ride as his partner. And it was the longest race ever. It was 960 Ks. We'd added a prologue at the beginning, so it was a 9-day race, Saturday to Sunday.
This is mountain bike legend, Hall of Famer, and someone kind of synonymous with the Cape Epic, Thomas Frischknecht. or Frischi as he's often called. He was instrumental in getting Nino Schurter to fall in love with the race and continuously coming back as he manages one of the world's most successful mountain bike teams, Scott Schramm. Frischnick also started the Swiss Epic event, which later became part of the Epic series that qualifies competitors for entry into the Cape Epic.
I was at the start line of 11 Cape Epics. I didn't finish 11. The first one I did with Tom Ritchie was, I think it was 2006. I think the imagery I saw was kind of what made me go there. Riding a bike in Africa is something that was attractive to me, and I think that's kind of for all European or non-Africans. That's kind of a safari thing. It has this adventurous approach, being in Africa and being in a different continent. Usually it's always in a time of a year you just as a European you just search for sun, because it come out of a long dark cold winter. And then when I've seen these videos and photos of the Cape Epic, and that was definitely something that I wanted to try too.
Kevin eventually felt there was a need to change up the format and evolve the event away from a point-to-point race.
And it was a few weeks after that race finished that we had the idea that, well, why are we moving it every day? Like, why don't we start in Cape Town, and why don't we do 2 nights at one location, or 3 nights even, and do these loop stages and just break the link to the start location that we've been using for the first 5 years. And it wasn't actually about the cost. It was actually more about the logistics. Okay. And it was a absolute sea change for the race, because the implications of that included starting the race in Cape Town. It meant that you could have a press conference in Cape Town, meant the riders could stay in awesome hotels in Cape Town, easy to get to, flying to Cape Town, easy for us to organize. We're right there, and our offices are in Cape Town. And so, it became more of this. I mean, the first race, we did the prologue on Table Mountain. I mean, so it became much more accessible to spectators. So kind of like started entering the sporting mainstream. It wasn't happening, out in the bush and, out in areas of South Africa that would be like inaccessible for spectators. So that was the first change. The second change was the fact that the sponsors and, all the service providers, because they knew they're sitting up for 2 or 3 days, meant that they would just invest more in the infrastructure they'd put up for the race experience. So where you see that perhaps the hospitality for 400-500 riders at the finish line every day, I mean, now it's over 1,000, and the finish is over 2,500 hospitality. But because they knew they'd be using it for a few days, they would invest more in the setup. So it was more like the feeling and the experience of the race changed. And then also we just bought lots of equipment. So we would set up those 3 race villages in advance in like 2 weeks, and we wouldn't bother moving anything from one point to the next. We would just, make a capital outlay, buy all the stuff we needed, and then just spend 2 weeks setting up the villages in advance and not have any stress with moving anything. And it just meant the race could then, be a lot bigger. And I mean, people often said, "Oh, yeah, they're doing it because they're saving money." But you rent a Superlink truck. Yeah, you save some petrol, but you still got to rent the truck for 8 days. You still got to have the driver for 8 days. And if you're employing 10 doctors and 10 nursing staff, you still got to pay them for 8 days. Yeah, you save maybe on accommodation, but it wasn't really about the cost saving. It was more the format of the race could change. Like, people invested more into the race village, and the most important was that suddenly we didn't have to move west every day, and the trails got better. We could, like, if we had awesome trails in an area, well, then we would ride like 80 Ks of awesome single track. And what we found is that we're going through farmland of, and I mean, some of the wealthiest South Africans have all got these beautiful farms in this area. And it suddenly became that they were competing with each other to host the Cape Epic. And, they would be building at their own expense amazing single track. because I love the idea of, of having Nina Schurter come racing through their farm. And so they just, we basically had all these amazing trails that were being built on beautiful farms that might only be used once a year when the K-Levy came through.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I never did it as a point-to-point race as a competitor, but I certainly enjoyed the fact that I didn't have to move every single day when I did it as the format you described. What did it feel like for you not actually being able to take part in the event up until I think it was 2016?
It was, for me, the satisfaction of the race was being creative.
Yeah.
There's so many things now which are, you accept as totally standard in two-person team mountain bike racing. But I mean, gosh, we wrote the rules, right? The UCI didn't have any mountain bike stage racing rules, let alone for two-person team races. And we learned that the hard way. I mean, we had some rules that we put down. We used some UCI rules, and generally the commissaires would be at the race and they would have to try and solve things by merging these two sets of rules. And we had like some big issues. And as the stakes became higher, as teams were spending more and more money to try and win the race, suddenly the rules that are being interpreted at the race just they had to stand up to so much more scrutiny than in the first few years. And we had like some, really big issues. Potential court cases with, teams in Europe phoning us, they're going to sue us. And,
For what?
The way the rules have been interpreted. There was some years where a different team might have won if the rules have been interpreted slightly differently. At the moment, I think it's maybe 25,000 euros per team. So if Scott sends out 3 teams to ride the race and they've got 1 team on a win, the rule of thumb is they spend 25,000 euros per team. In the world of road cycling, it's not a lot, but in mountain biking, that's a big chunk of your budget to spend 25,000 euro per team, which you need 3 teams probably to try and win the race. So
yeah,
you're in for 75,000, 100,000 euros per team. That let's say per factory team that wants to have a team on the podium. Now also the teams generally come out at least once or twice before the epic to get a climate host to the heat, and they would come out for a month potentially, or certainly a few weeks in January, February in advance of the race. So it's a big investment, and the stakes are higher, and they want to win it. And so we had in 2009 we had this big incident where there's some controversy, and we realized we have to start with a blank sheet of paper, write our own set of rules, work with a South Africa's top law firm, and write a set of rules and then submit it to the UCI and say, that's it. These are the rules in the entirety that are being used for the race. And we have a very good relationship with ECI, and they adopted those rules as the standard rules for two-person team racing. So I think now if you want to be an HC stage race, if you do two-person format, you use those rules. And so I gave that as an example because, for me, that was why I wanted to be at the race. I couldn't be riding the race if I had to sit at the managers meeting and get the feedback from these managers that are, ready to punch each other. So there are a host of things like that. And it wasn't, let's say the riding was something that we got dialed quite quickly. The route and the experience for the riders on the bike, besides some of the, talking about the pros now, but the actual riding experience, we got that dialed very early on the race. It was all the things around it that needed to be improved, but also to grow. If I take, the way we do our pro tech service, the way we do our hospitality programs, the way we do our VIP race tours on the event, where we do a companion programs where sponsors come and ride for 2 days and they ride e-bikes around and watch the race, and we get celebrities come in and host them and former pros to come in. And it's all like the soft touches around the race which separate it, which make it different from any other mountain bike stage race or mountain bike race. That's where we needed to improve. That's where, let's say, that's where the business was. That was the differentiator. And that's what I love doing, creating that area. So I spend a lot of time with that. And I think in 2014, I employed a CEO, and I remember the 2015 race, I was thinking, and this is like now 12 years in, like, cool, this is looking good. Okay. I remember being at the race and literally drinking champagne and having beers with some other sponsors on the finish line and going, okay, it's done. There's not too much more I can add to this. And so I said, for sure, next year I ride the race. And that was 2016. I rode the race first time. So first race, 2004, 12 years later, I said, cool, I'm now ready to ride it. And I loved it.
What was the reality of it versus the expectations? Did those two things align?
Absolutely. Yeah, first of all, it was incredibly emotional. I mean, I remembered, and yeah, I mentioned some of the loneliness and the stress. I mean, when you're looking to lose everything you've worked for, I mean, like whatever, you build up your personal wealth up until age 30 and you think it's going well, and then suddenly it's all on the line. And you're not sure if it's gonna, if you're gonna make it. Yeah, there's a lot of stress, right? And you're carrying it on your own. So I'd had some low moments, and so then to then be at the race and like knowing that it's working, and you've got through all that, and then I just think you remember driving to the start of the first event and actually being, having wet eyes because it was so emotional for me driving up to start my prologue. And but what was probably far more satisfying was when I crossed the finish line on the final day. I remember the feeling of this exhilaration, and not because of like it was my race that I crossed, but like just from the riding. Because I mean, in the 8 days when you ride the epic, and I'm sure you experienced it, like you just get immersed in it. You forget about everything else in the world, and all you think about is you feel like a pro, man. You feel like you're born to be a bike racer, and for 8 days you're immersed in this mountain biking experience, and and it's all you think about. And then you cross the finish line, and like the way I felt when I crossed the finish line on that final day was like, this is what I designed. Like, this is the experience I wanted people to feel when they finished 8 days of the epic. And so that was like incredibly satisfying. And yeah, for me, that was like the success, like I wanted to create this awesome adventure travel experience with this feeling of achievement. And I had that from a sporting perspective, not necessarily from being my business that, I just finished.
What were the conversations and events that led up to your relationship with Iron Man and them eventually taking a stake in the business?
To be honest, the relationship actually started with a Swiss company called Infront Sports and Media, which in 2015 was owned by Wonder Sports Group, which also owned Iron Man. And Infront worked very closely with Iron Man. And I had a relationship with Infront for, since I think 2009 was the first time I started working with Infront. And I had said to the individual with whom I had worked with at Infront, I said, like, listen, we might be able to do something, but you got to come and ride the race first before, we do, expand our commercial engagement. And it took a while, but he came out in 2015 to ride the race. And, for me, that was important because like the opportunity around the epic, it's not about buying billboards or just selling the media, which is what Infront does. It's such a rich inventory of what you could give to a sponsor or how you could, let's say, monetize the event. It's a smorgasbord of opportunities around the race. And to be honest, you just can't communicate it unless you actually immerse yourself in the product. And when you do, it's incredibly successful, which is why ABSA has sponsored the race for 20 years, and it gives them a phenomenal ROI. But you really need to understand how to measure it because, and how to exploit the opportunity. And so you need to actually immerse yourself in the race. And it's absolutely not a product that you can do with a cold call and sell, commercial airtime around a media package or sell billboards in a stadium, etc. You got to be there. And so I eventually came out in 2015, rode the race. I loved creating. And I thought the next phase of creating would be to build an international portfolio, but you really needed to increase, or you need to build the category of two-person team stage racing. I mentioned that his top riders, the only race I did was the Cape Epic in terms of stage racing. So what if we could create a few more of these two-person team races around the world so that you could start building heroes out of the guys that are actually winning this 2-person team race format. And hence you build a category, and the Cape Epic was still on the pedestal. So that's how you could build the Cape Epic. So I thought that I needed a international, let's say, global operator to build the category out globally. And, Ironman is the biggest mass participation sports company in the world. Perfect partner, right? And like I said, my relationship with Infront was, I've got huge respect for the company. And so literally when I crossed the finish line, so that was 2015 when the rand was tanking. And I was on a ski holiday in Arosa where we've got a place. And HP Subberg from Infront came out had a coffee with me and told me the exciting things happening between Infront and Ironman. And he'd ridden the race the year before. I said, cool, why don't you come out the race this year again and bring the CEO of Ironman? And so Andrew Messick was there on the finish line when I crossed the finish line. And we got chatting immediately. So that was after the 2016 race when I started. And the idea was, that we would build this global series and that the Cape Epic would be the pinnacle event of the series. And so that was the rationale for starting the discussions around sale. But to be clear, it wasn't about me catching out and exiting. It was more about actually doing what I wanted to do in an enhanced fashion.
The Andrew Messick, the Ironman CEO, he kind of saw Ironman from kind of ground level and saw not the promise, but the opportunity. Did they start acquiring races or building new races after that to create a series?
Yeah, so soon after the sale, the plan was always to build this epic series. And I'd already teed up another South African race, which was a very profitable model, smaller in absolute numbers and maybe not so well known internationally, but great business. So we bought that race and then bought the Swiss Epic and moved it to Graubünden, and I must say, turned that race around. I mean, the input from the Cape Epic team had a huge impact on the success of the Swiss Epic. Bought a race in Croatia, got the race in Australia and New Zealand, and next thing he had an Epic series. But in those early days after the acquisition of the Epic was announced, I mean, there are a lot of mountain bike races in the world that were approaching us and saying, could they be part of the series? And I mean, there were tourist areas that were saying, like, do you want to, can we have a race in the Epic series? And it was very interesting for me because it meant that, we pretty much got to see the financials and got to see the economic model of, almost every race that listeners would have heard of. At some point, they've probably had a discussion with the Epic series or Ironman. And you get to look under the hood, and it's a very, very different economic model to the Cape Epic. In fact, even the other races in the Epic series, compared to how the Cape Epic operated, it's very different. It's kind of given me confidence also for my next venture, because I know that myself and the team with which I built the Cape Epic, we've got some, let's say, insights into building an economic model which is quite different at bike stage races to most other amateur bike stage races. And I say that with the greatest respect.
Here's Thomas Frischnick again, speaking about the Swiss Epic's connection to the Cape Epic and the ingredient that the original Cape Epic format had, which made it special.
Knowing Kevin for a long time, Kevin was also kind of the spark to start the Swiss Epic. We like sitting in my garden here in Switzerland, close to Zurich, when we talked about why doesn't Switzerland, with all the great terrain and trails we have, doesn't have something similar than the Cape Epic. And that's where the idea started of the Swiss Epic, which he then kind of was involved in the very early days, and I became one of the three founders of the Swiss Epic back in the days. The Epic series came a bit later. That was actually when Cape Epic got sold to Ironman. Then they started to build a series, and that's when Swiss Epic was then resold the Swiss Epic to Ironman as well. So that's when it became part of the Epic series. But I have to say that in the last couple of years, there was also kind of a decrease on that being part of a big event feeling that we had in the early days at the Cape Epic. Everyone was staying at the venue, sleeping either in tents or camper vans. And nowadays you see a whole lot more people sleeping in bed and breakfast or hotels, and then just coming to the race start in the morning, which for sure is more convenient for athletes, but it takes away a lot from the vibe. There used to be that also the only possibility to eat was in the event tent. In the early days, so the tent was packed with 2,500 people, and a great atmosphere, great vibe, and that kind of faded away now. Only the poor guys stay there because they sleep in the tents, and all the others they disappear and stay in fancy places. So it's time. It's definitely time to have something new, where I hope, and I think that's also Kevin's intention with Gravel Burn, to get everything a bit back together again. The places we're gonna sleep, there will be most likely not just a cozy bed and breakfast or a 5-star hotel nearby. So hopefully everyone has to stay at the venue with in the same tents, and kind of have an equal let's say equal chance in a way,
Kevin served his earnout period with Ironman, and he just announced his next endeavor called Gravel Burn, a South African point-to-point gravel stage race which has similarities to the roots of Cape Epic. So you've stepped away, you've had a bit of time off. You're going to do this again in a different in a different way. Tell me about the Gravel Burn and what it's like starting with a blank slate again. How does that feel?
Well, I've kind of had the foot off the gas. I mean, even if I was still involved in the Epic, I mean, I've had the foot off the gas since you've sold, and once I was very confident that we're hitting the targets. But then I was looking for different things to do, actually. And I guess when I had the idea to start the Gravel Burn, it was just like suddenly everything, all the pieces of the puzzle were coming together again, because it's something that it's an area I love doing. I mean, I've been creative in the the bike event space for many years. I've got some great experience. I've got some awesome contacts and networks and team members in Cape Town as well that actually want to do this. And I love building the Epic. And now we can do it all over again, except utilizing our skills and our experience. And I would hate to, let's say, compete with the Cape Epic, because it's, I love it. And, I'm quite proud of the legacy, and I'm quite proud of the fact that it's going from strength to strength, even if I've completely stepped out. I'm not involved at all. And it's been like that for a good few years now. And I'm just incredibly lucky that there's a new category in cycling, which frankly, I think is creating a bigger opportunity than the one on which we capitalized 20 years ago. I think gravel riding as a pro and mass participation event for sure can be bigger than a mountain bike event, and for a host of reasons. And so I'm like, wow, this is, you can do, I want to say not the same again, but it's like, you're certainly playing in a space that you know very well. You do it that much faster because of your network, and the nature of gravel riding and the market. I mean, the guys that actually, the folk that are around the world gravel riding, are more numerous, and I want to say that the potential pros that are doing these races are more valuable as media. Let's say you can create more valuable media around them. And so I think that a gravel stage race that is somewhat, similar economic model or similar model to the Cape Epic has huge potential. I think bigger than the Cape Epic. So I'm doubling down on it. And yeah,
Tell me the concept that you've settled on. What's the concept you've settled on? What's the format?
So, some key things. Big choice was, do we do solo or teams of two? Because like I said earlier, the team of two is the secret sauce for mountain bike stage racing. But for gravel riding, we've chosen a solo race for three reasons. The first is, the format for racing is established. And in terms of, solo riders, and also the factory teams, well, there aren't any factory teams, like generally the pros in gravel racing are, with their own collection of sponsors. They're privateers essentially. And so for them to find another rider, it would just be another hurdle to try and get a rider with complementary sponsors and budgets that are in the same realm, let's say. And then the third reason is that for safety, because if you cruising along at 40 k's an hour on a peloton of 100, and you're doing that for an hour maybe, and with the Epic, it's easy to look back for your partner because you get a bit of single track, you get a bit slower, look back, oh, you're still there, cool, we're together. Gosh, I don't want to give any reason to any rider, especially if you go, into the amateur ranks, for them to be looking back for their partner at 40 k's an hour on a gravel road, surrounded by another 100 riders doing that speed. It's like, because I know from the cycle turn Cape Town, it's number one cause of accidents where a whole peloton goes down in the amateur ranks because some guy's looking back or waving to his family on a overhead bridge. So you got the safety factor, and that's why we said no, definitely go for solo. But because of what we know from the Epic, that this camaraderie of coming out with your mate, we're doing let's say some service packages and some upgrade options that you need to do as a team of two. So you can buy a mobile home option with a driver provided by the race as a team of two. So you'd be in a mobile home together, or various like accommodation upgrades you'd do as either with your life partner or your riding partner. And also we're going to give the ability to buy a 2-pack entry. Because if you're in Uruguay and you heard about this race in South Africa, and you want to, you get all excited about traveling to South Africa, and you want to do it with your mate, right? And if the race is setting up, you don't want to get an entry and then your mate doesn't get an entry. So you'll be able to buy a 2-pack and buy 2 entries. And we might actually increase that number, so you can do it like a typical shopping cart. Buy potentially buy four entries into the race, and then 4 of you can travel to the race together. And it sounds odd because maybe other races that might not sell out so quickly. I think our race is going to sell out very quickly, so it's quite important to have that locked in, that you can travel with friends.
And it's point to point, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, over 7 stages. Yeah. How come you went back to that after your learnings with Cape Epic?
So I definitely wouldn't try this, 10 years ago. But I think that, we're going in with our eyes wide open. And I think the spirit of gravel is about adventure and exploring and doing long distances and actually seeing the country and seeing the terrain that you're riding through. With the Epic, it's, you've got bleeding eyeballs at the top of the pass, and then you go down as fast as you can. You don't even see the view. You don't even know where you're riding. Okay, you're just focusing on the 10 meters in front of you, and you're making sure you're staying upright. And we want to create more of a all-round experience, 24-hour experience in at the Gravel Burn, where sure it's a race, but it's more of like a racing experience that's, I think, it's going to be quite unique because you're going to a beautiful area of South Africa. It's an area where, not very many bike races have taken place over the years. And it's, the most beautiful, long, desolate gravel roads through an area where there's actually game. You'll see animals. When we did our test ride a few weeks back, you literally, you're riding, there's giraffes on the side, there's loads of different types of antelope. When we go through the game reserves, literally we saw a rhino from the bike. Elephants, And so it's a beautiful area of the country. And you just got to do distance to see these areas of the country. And we're approaching the logistics completely differently. We're not going to be moving things from one camp to the next. We're literally investing in the infrastructure. We've always got a bit more capital to throw at it now. We're investing in infrastructure, and we're partnering with landowners to actually build camps. And you can do it because you're in an area of the country where the farms are massive. I mean, really, really big. It's not wine country like where the Cape Epic traverses. It's in either big game or hunting or merino sheep farming. And it's just, the farmers have got much bigger pieces of land. So we're building huge villages, and the idea is that we'll hopefully take, a large number of riders and take them to parts of South Africa where, very few cyclists have been before.
You mentioned you had a vision for Cape Epic from the start about, I think you said, building the world's biggest mountain bike stage race in the world, something like that. Do you have a similar vision or a vision that you're kind of stating right now for the gravel burn that you can state? Or would you rather keep that private since it hasn't started yet?
Has anyone, I'm hoping some of the listeners have seen images of the bivouac at the Dakar Rally. Okay. It is massive. And it is just the people that are on the race, right? There's no spectators. There's no, it's basically everyone doing the race and the support crew. And they're going through this challenge together. Okay. And particularly in the years where, the Dakar was going to like areas where it's like there was no one, right? A desert, it's just the race. And that's what we want with the gravel burn. Okay. So, not thousands of spectators, just the riders and their crew camping in the desert under the stars, big orange African sunsets, and having more of a camp experience where you'd get out of the tent, you'd be a campfire, you'd sit around the campfire, you'd have breakfast right there. You won't have to go off to these big marquees and eat with 1,000 other riders. It would be just much more intimate, and at the same time we're calling it scalable intimacy because we're creating these small called lapas, which is the African word for like a gathering, where you'd have just 25 tents, campfire, and all the services that you need. So basic bike repair services right there, massages right in your lapa, breakfast, snacks, some of the dinners, not all the dinners, some of the dinners served right in the lapa with like you and 24 mates, right? Or mates that you get to know very well over the course of the race. But then this would get, in a modular fashion, would be expanded to have much larger riders, much larger number of riders at the race. And we think we can create this like scalable race village experience. And that I think can be quite special. And yeah, it's, the land is, like I said, we've got oodles of space. So we could create these large, Dakar bivouac style race villages in the Karoo. And yeah, it's the distances are going to be, most days between 80 and 100 and 130. We've got a queen stage of 175 Ks, and it's 7 days, 850 kilometers in total, 11,000 meters of climbing. And I think there are gravel stage races out there at the moment. But I think we're going to create
I can't think of any, but I think it's a great sort of new thing.
Well, if you take the Cape Epic, maybe there were 2 races in its 20-year history that had less than 1,000 riders, and it was still sold out. It was just, when we were still building it to a number over 1,000. So there's certainly no stage race that's got over 1,000 riders, and there's full service experience where you get 3 meals a day, massages, mechanics, race hospital, everything set up in this race village. And there's for sure no race like that. It's certainly in a big number, say over 1,000 riders. And so we think, it's a unique opportunity again. And I know we can do it because we've done it with the Cape Epic. And whilst we're not going to be copying the Cape Epic, we've got some cool new features like this modular LARPA concept. which creates that intimacy, which I think is what people want. And I think that's like the spirit of gravel, where you're more so you're riding with your mates and, taking on the distance challenge with your mates, and you can shoot the breeze at the end of the day. Your bike's right there. You can talk about your bikes. You can talk about the day on the bike. And at the moment, the biggest gravel races in the world are largely one-day races. It might be a 4-day festival where they have an art ride and a shakeout ride and a demo day. But ultimately, they come down to one huge day on the Saturday or the Sunday. And the amount of training you have to put in to ride a 200-mile race is phenomenal. Okay, it's definitely more training and preparation than you'd need to ride 7-day or to ride 850 kilometers in 7 days. So we think, the barrier to entry is even lower than, like, say, the big one-day races, which are exploding in popularity around the world in the gravel category. So we think that this, it could be very appealing to a very large audience of folk that want to do something different. That maybe the Cape Epic has been too technical for them for whatever reason, and we're now appealing to, road cyclists as well to come and do an off-road experience in Africa.
I've got a lot of people in Australia interested, so including myself. So I can't wait. If it's 100th as good as the Cape Epic, you're doing pretty well, and I'm confident it'll be more than that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I must say that this Starting Gravel Burn I've obviously immersed myself now in gravel riding, and I'm loving it too. I'm really loving it.
That's Kevin Vermaak with his story on how the Cape Epic became the crown jewel in mountain bike stage racing all the way down in South Africa. Even after I hear this story, it still defies all odds, which probably speaks to Kevin's vision, his capabilities, and, as the Afrikaans saying goes, a boer maak 'n plan, which literally translates to meaning a farmer makes a plan. Essentially, this statement has come to mean that South Africans are people who can make a plan and solve a problem with very few resources with a lot of grit. If you ever thought there should be a Tour de France equivalent in gravel stage racing, I'm going to call it here and now. Look no further than Kevin's upcoming Gravel Burn in October 2025. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating. I can see that over half the listeners here aren't subscribers, so subscribing helps others discover the show in their feeds. This episode was produced by Red Bricks Media, and the music was composed by Ashley Deneve. Thank you for listening.